Okay, good afternoon everyone and welcome to another episode of Ding and the Quiz is Done. Today is the 25th of March and today's Today in History is the anniversary of Martin Luther King leading a march in Washington against the USA's involvement in the Vietnam War in 1967. This is an event in history which we will come back to when we look at conflict and tension in Asia in Year 11. So, same as usual, the Do Now quiz is in the link in the description. So, pause the video now, complete the quiz. Okay, so today we are looking at this task. Explain the importance of Harold Godwinson's victory at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Essentially, in our last lesson, we looked at William and what he did during most of 1066. This lesson, we're looking at what Harold was doing in 1066. Same starting event, the death of Edward the Confessor, but different setting. So, as previously mentioned in the last lesson, Harold crowned himself king on the 6th of January, one day after Edward the Confessor's death, and this was really unusual for an Anglo-Saxon king. Normally they would wait several months before being crowned, and the decision to do so as quickly as possible demonstrates quite how nervous Harold was about people challenging him for the throne. Now, before you do today's reading, which outlines Harold Godwinson's year, there are two things that you need to be aware of on the map, and I would suggest that you have up while you do the reading. So, first of all, in the reading, there is a reference to the Earldom of Northumbria. Now, this is up in the north of England, and originally it was run by Earl Tostig, who was one of Harold Godwinson's brothers. Now, he was exiled from England for alleged corruption before 1066, but it is important to be aware of that because it will also make reference to Tostig. The other location you need to be aware of is the Isle of Wight. This is the location near where Harold Godwinson gathered his troops. Technically, a lot of historians refer to troops being gathered all along the south coast, but near the Isle of Wight is where the majority of Harold's troops would have been. So, you need to have these two locations up in front of you while you do the reading, but we do the same process. You read through the key word, there's only one today, choke point, and then do the reading, and then we will discuss it. So pause, do the reading. Right, hopefully that was enjoyable. I feel this reading has got everything you would possibly want. Violence, funny quips, people walking over seas of corpses. It's got all the makings of a fantastic film. So, to sum up Harold Godwinson's year, I think it's safe to say it was a busy one. He spends the majority of the year gathering his army and then waiting near the Isle of Wight. He's forced to disband that army because the majority of the Fyrd, the ordinary people fighting for Harold, need to collect their crops. It's harvest time. And because Harold is running out of supplies, he returns to London. Almost immediately on returning to London, he learns that the Earls Edwin and Morcar have been defeated by Harold, Hardrada and Tostig at the Battle of Fulford Gate, so he then has to travel northwards, collecting an army as he goes, where he defeats the Norwegian army at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, and unfortunately, 3 days after his victory at Stamford Bridge, William lands on the south coast of England at Pevensey, and so Harold then has to travel back down. Now, on the map, there are a couple of things which need a little bit of further explanation. First of all, technically, there should be another spot just here. That line should technically go back to London and then to the area around Hastings. That's because Harold didn't go straight from the area around York to the area around Hastings. He briefly stopped in London, and when he stopped in London, he did that to gather some more troops and to arrange a fleet. And that fleet, let's get the pen, that fleet was designed to, I don't know what happened there, was designed to cut off William's fleet on its way back to Normandy. This essentially means that William is now going to be forced into a battle with Harold, as there is very little option for him to escape. So that's point one. The second point is to do with something that you may have been taught in Key Stage 3 when you looked at the Battle of Hastings. And quite often when teachers teach this topic in Key Stage 3, they talk a lot about how Harold's army was tired because they had to travel from the site of the Battle of Stamford Bridge all the way back down to the site of the Battle of Hastings and fight pretty much straight away. Now, it is accurate that some of William's army had to do that. However, this probably would have been the housecarls. That's the really elite, professional part of Harold's army, almost like his bodyguards. The majority of the ordinary people fighting for Harold in the Third would have been dispersed up north, and then Harold would have gathered further troops as he travelled down south. So it is accurate to say that some of Harold's army would have been tired by the time they reached the site of the Battle of Hastings, but it would be inaccurate to say that all of Harold's army would have been tired and that this was a huge factor in Harold's defeat. Okay, so let's quickly switch to the visualizer. You now have a table on the back of your sheets with positive consequences of the Battle of Stamford Bridge and negative consequences of the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Now within that, we're not only including the battle itself, but we're also including the events leading up to it, and also have a think about its geographical location. So fill this in note form, both the positive and the negative side, and then we will go through our notes together. Fill in the table, pause the video now. Okay, so let's start off with our positives. First and foremost, the death of Harold Hardrada means that there is now one fewer contender for the throne. Now, if you've been paying really close attention to me, which I'm sure all of you have been, you will remember that some historians may argue with this as being an advantage of Stamford Bridge. Some historians argue that Harold Hardrada was actually only on the English coast to take advantage of the situation and to raid England and to steal from England. But if you side with those historians who believe that Harold Hardrada did want to take the throne, this is a massive advantage for Harold. It means there's one fewer threat. We also have less risk of rebellion. Or, in fact, we could talk about further invasion. And that's through the death of Harold's brother Tostig. So if Harold manages to keep control of the throne, he's going to have a lower risk of rebellion and a much lower risk of invasion. This is also not just a victory, but it's a resounding victory. For many, I'm just going to take a sip of my cola, for many of the Norse soldiers, they were quite literally caught with their trousers down. This was a surprise attack which worked incredibly well, and as a result of that, those soldiers who fought in Stamford Bridge and fought in the Battle of Hastings are going to have much higher morale. Which means that they're going to fight harder and they're going to fight longer. For Harold, I'm not sure whether I would count this as a positive or a negative. Arguably it's more of a neutral, but it gives Harold more confidence in Anglo-Saxon battle tactics, and specifically the use of the shield wall, because it was used to great effect in this battle. So if Harold held on to the throne, this would be a massive plus, and for those troops that fight in both battles, this is going to be an advantage. In terms of our negatives, as I said before when we were talking about the map, for those troops who fight in both battles, this does mean that they are going to be exhausted before the Battle of Hastings even begins. Now we'll discuss this in later lessons, but the Battle of Hastings is much longer than normal medieval battles, and it essentially becomes a battle of who can last longer, and that means that stamina is going to be incredibly important. So some of Harold's troops are going to be exhausted, and in fact his experienced troops are going to be exhausted because those are the ones who are likely to travel with him. This also gives William the opportunity to land on the coast of England without any resistance. This is going to give him the opportunity to establish a foothold and to ensure that his troops are well rested and well fed before the battle. Landed without resistance. Whoops. There we go. And not only is this going to give William time to make sure his troops are well fed and well rested, but it's also going to give William generally time to prepare. So it's both a positive and a negative for Harold Godwinson. And what we need to do now is have a look at how we can put that into an exam question. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. And the exam question we're going to look at today is another importance question. Explain the importance of Harold Godwinson's victory at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Now, in the video yesterday, we had a look at a weak and a strong model for this question, and I really emphasised this idea of having a big general principle, having a fact to support it, and then explaining that fact. So rather than show you another model, I'm going to ask you now to spend 10 minutes and just to give this question a go. It's exactly the same as in lessons. If it all goes wrong, the worst possible thing that can happen is that you send it to me, I give you some feedback, and you get better. So time yourself for 10 minutes, give the question a go. Okay, let's have a look at my model then, so that you can start green penning your answer and seeing where you can improve. Let's go back to the visualizer. Just going to fold this over so that we can see it better. Now, as before, I've only done one paragraph, but it's got all of those principles in there that you should have in your answers. And I have my new highlighter. Harold's victory at the Battle of Stamford Bridge was important because it put his army at a disadvantage at the Battle of Hastings. That is the big principle, the big idea, which I'm going to spend the rest of this paragraph proving right. The Battle of Stamford Bridge took place in Northumbria on the northeast coast of England, whereas William the Conqueror landed at Pevensey on the southeast coast of England. Fact that proves that I'm right, short, sharp and to the point, no knowledge from it. The result of this was twofold. William the Conqueror landed unchallenged and was able to easily establish a foothold in Wessex. This meant that William's troops would have been better rested and would have had higher morale during the Battle of Hastings than if they had been forced to continually defend themselves. Secondly, as well as losing some of his troops at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, the battle, combined with the need to march quickly south, would have meant that the Anglo-Saxon troops who had fought in both battles would have been tired by the time they fought in the Battle of Hastings. This would have given William's troops a significant advantage. This is the same as the style of paragraph that I showed you last lesson. You've got the overall principle, I've given the fact to prove it right, and then I've split that off into two chains of reasoning. There we go, two little chains. I've split that off into two chains of reasoning, and you don't have to do that. I'm just doing that because it's there, but that's resulted in a much more in-depth paragraph. Now, there are a couple of bits within this paragraph that I really want to highlight because they're common areas that students missed or miss. That bit. And that bit. So these are links in the chain which students often miss when they are writing this style of paragraph. So let's just take the first one. William the Conqueror landed unchallenged and was able to easily establish a foothold in Wessex. This meant they would have been better rested. This meant they would have had higher morale than if they had been forced to continually defend themselves. So this bit here about being forced to continually defend themselves, this demonstrates an understanding of the specific historical event that you are discussing. If you miss out that little bit at the end, then in theory you could be talking about any troops who were forced to fight in any situation, any point in history. By talking about this idea of the Battle of Hastings and talking about having to continue to defend themselves, you're making it really, really specific to that period. And it's the same here. They would have been tired by the time they fought in the Battle of Hastings. So bringing it back to why something would have caused a disadvantage for Harold at the Battle of Hastings. So have a look at my answer. General principle, fact prove me right, chains of reasoning, the big focus on explaining why something was a disadvantage, and green pen your answer. Once you've done so, you can either take a photo of it and email it to me, or if you've done it on a word processor, you can email it to me as well. If you have typed it, please can you make it clear where you have changed things in green pen so that I know whether I'm marking a first draft or whether I'm looking at something that has been tweaked. Okay,